Thank you, Michael. It's always a blessing to have you with us. We are glad to have you here. If I could set new curriculum in high school, I would add a course on how to tell a good story. I do believe now in our world that the ability to tell a good story is one of the most lucrative, powerful abilities you have. People vote on who tells the best story. That's just the way they vote. So you can get elected to office if you can tell a good story. People choose their medical care based on which story they believe. They look at a bunch of stories and they buy one and they reject another one, and that's how they make that decision. People buy products, don't you? You buy it, I buy it, based on the salesperson's ability to tell a good story. If you can tell a good story, you can make a sale. Juries decide the fate of an accused person, not so much on the evidence, video or documentation, but upon the who tells the best story. If a story resonates with us, if it sort of seems right in our gut for whatever reason, we believe it and we go with it. So if you can tell a good story, you can get elected to office and you can get off if you're charged with a crime. You can do both if you could tell a good story. I wonder what makes us believe one story and not another. Probably a lot of factors, don't you think? A lot of factors go into that. But one of the factors is that sometimes we just think a story is too good to be true. But I want you to think about something else tonight. I want you to think about the possibility that in some stories, the truth is even better than we could have ever expected. I'm going to tell you 3 stories right now. Now, I'm going to tell you 3 versions of the same story. And then I'm going to ask you to vote on which version you think is true. One of them is true, but the other 2 are false. You understand what we're going to do? Now, I thought there'd be more voters tonight, so you're going to have to really pay attention and vote. You at home can vote, but I won't know how you're voting. All right, here are the 3 stories. Back this summer, as I was driving up a mountain road in West Virginia, a black bear the size of a riding lawnmower came galloping out of the woods in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, stopping about 20 yards from this bear, and the bear ran off into the woods. That's version number 1. Did you get it? All right, here's version number 2. Last summer, when I was going up a mountain road in West Virginia, a black bear the size of a riding lawnmower came galloping out of the woods, and I hit my brakes, and I stopped about 20 yards from that bear. That bear, when the bear's paws hit the asphalt of that road, he must have decided I'm in the wrong place because he slammed on the brakes. And when he did a perfect somersault on that road. His posterior went over his head and it came down. He kind of settled himself, and then he stood up on his back legs and looked at me and gave me one of these. As if to say, I'm okay, I'm okay. And then he went back down and ran back into the woods from whence he came. That's the second version. All right, here's the third version. Last summer, when I was going up a mountain road in West Virginia, a black bear the size of a riding lawnmower came charging out, and I saw him and hit the brakes, and I stopped about 20 yards from the bear. The bear, when he put his paws down on that asphalt, must have realized I'm in the wrong place because he slammed on the brakes, and he did a perfect somersault. His posterior went over his head, it came down, and he kind of settled himself. He stood up and gave me one of these, and then he said, as if to say, I'm okay, I'm okay, and then he sang the entire version of Bare Necessities from the Disney version of the Jungle Book, and then went back down on all fours and ran into the woods. You got the 3 versions? How many of you think the first version's probably right? We got them right here. All right, how many of you think the second? And she's, okay, how many of you think the third? All right. The second version is actually the true story. That bear jumped up and he did one of these. Now, I don't know what he was thinking, but it certainly looked like he was saying, I'm okay, don't worry about me, and ran back off into the woods. Sometimes the truth of a story is even better than you would have expected. like the story tonight. Now, I can tell the story that we just read in 3 versions. And people have easier time believing some of the versions than the other. For instance, I can tell you that 2,000 years ago in the city of Nazareth, there was a young couple who received a notice. I don't know how they received it, but they received a notice that the emperor was going to require them to go back to the husband's hometown in Bethlehem and register with the Roman Empire. You had to register so they would know who to tax, and you had to register so they'd know how many men there were to draft into military duty, and you had to register for some other census reasons that they needed. And so the husband and wife, they went all the journey back to Bethlehem. And the woman, here's an interesting part of the story, the woman was 9 months pregnant. And when they got to Bethlehem, they only had one inn in Bethlehem. It was a little town. You might have heard about that. And so they went to the inn, but there was no room for them in the inn. And so they had to find shelter out in a stable. And they went out and made a bed of hay. And while they were out there that night, the woman delivered a baby boy. The husband helped deliver. He took the baby. He wrapped it in some cloths that he found in the stable, and then he laid it in a feeding trough or a manger, and that's where the baby slept its first night. Now, I think most people would buy that story. There's nothing in that story that would seem incredible. Given the rustic nature of the time, given the lack of professional medical care, given the complete ignorance about bacteria back then, I would imagine it was very feasible that a baby could be born in a barn, don't you think? I think there's nothing too incredible about that story. But what if I give you a second version of that story? What if I tell you that during the night that baby's slumber was interrupted by the visitation of shepherds? And they came to the mother and father and they said, "We were out working in our field when the sky lit up with angels. And we heard one of those angels say to us, 'Tonight in Bethlehem, the Messiah, the long-awaited one sent from God, has been born. And you can go see him.' If you go into Bethlehem, go to a stable, and you'll find this little baby wrapped in cloth, lying in a feeding trough or manger." Now, does that seem more incredible? A little harder to believe? What about it makes it a little harder to believe? That there would be angels? That angels would be in the sky? Does that seem a little out of the ordinary? Or that a baby was born as a plan of God, one that God had seen all along? Or maybe it seems mystifying to you that shepherds would make this journey? I don't know. Are there parts of that story that just seem beyond your ability to grab? What if I add one more part of the story? What if I say that this baby was predicted or seen in advance by visionaries and prophets for hundreds of years before it was born? And that the child's mother conceived the baby, but that the man who was in that stable had nothing to do to produce that baby. The baby was conceived by the Holy Spirit in this woman. This is a virgin birth. And that not long after this, some ancient folks from the east came, astrologers, and said they had read the night sky, and the sky had told them that a long-expected one had been born in Bethlehem, and they had come following the night sky to see that baby who they said was a newborn king, and they'd even brought him some gifts. Does that story seem even harder to believe? Well, what bothers you about that part? Does it bother you to think about a virgin birth? That seems a little far-fetched. Does it bother you to think that some prophets were actually not frauds, but actually could understand the plan of God and see the future? Does it bother you to think that there's people who can read the night sky and that the stars in the heavens actually do announce certain things that are going to happen on earth? What part of that seems to be too good to be true? I just want to remind you that the truth of some stories is better than we would have ever expected. Let me tell you one more story. The day after Thanksgiving, this very year, Karen and I and my sister-in-law Holly and my nephew Luke. Now, if you don't know this is a Christmas story, let me say that one more time. My wife Karen, my sister-in-law, what's her name? Holly, and my nephew, what's his name? Luke. We decided, well, I didn't decide anything. I just went along. That's what I usually do. But they decided that we were going to walk through a Civil War large cemetery in Marietta, Georgia. And so I was game, and we went in the front gate, and we began to walk across this cemetery. And my sister-in-law was an excellent tour guide. She could show us all the important markers and all the headstones that we needed to read about, and we made our way along. Now, my brother, David, he and his son, Caleb, they weren't there. They had to go to CVS to get a prescription. And Jacob and Holly's son, Max, weren't there. They decided to go Christmas shopping rather than to tour the great cemetery. Now, here's why I went along with this. Because my sister-in-law said, when we get across this expansive sacred place of the dead, on the other side, Confederate and Union soldiers are all going to be buried there. But when we get on the other side, there's going to be a gate, and we're going to walk into this wonderful little square in the middle of Marietta, Georgia, with quaint shops, and we're going to get something to eat. Now, they had me there. See, we're going to have some coffee, and we're going to, maybe buy some candy. There's a candy store. This is all sounding better to me. So I go, and we march through, and we look at everything. Takes us 30 minutes to get across this whole graveyard. We get to the other side, and what do you want to guess is true? That back gate is locked up tight. 14 feet high, made of iron. We all shake on the gate. Nothing happens. Not a one of us wanted to walk 30 minutes back to the front gate, then walk around the perimeter of this huge graveyard to get to the little square where there's coffee and something to eat. And so we tried to figure out what to do. Now, my sister-in-law, her daughter, Kayla, was with us. And Kayla's 20-something. And she dropped straight down to her back. And she kind of went scooched underneath that gate and right up on the other side. And then Karen and Holly and I looked at ourselves, and we decided that's not a good option for us. And so about that time, my brother shows up with Caleb in the prescription. And then right after that, Jacob and Max show up in a car. And they're all standing there. Standing beside me is Luke. And then to my amazement, Karen and Holly, they climb up the gate post. They're going 12 feet in the sky. They climb up there, and they shimmy down the other side like koala bears on a eucalyptus tree. They were just amazing. They went down. And then those 2-3 boys that were on the other side, they came over. They went over the fence, came to my side, and one of them said, Uncle John, we'll shove you over the top of that gate. I said, all right, boys, let's give it a try. And I put my foot in a toe hold, and they began to shove me higher and higher, like they were trying to push Santa's bag back up the chimney. And we went up, 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 and they got me to the top of that thing. And I looked down at the abject terror in the face of those on the other side. Karen and Holly and my brother David, they were like, oh, Lord. And in that moment, I thought, I don't know that I have the ability to hoist my 240 pounds, that might be exaggerated by 1 or 2 pounds, but 240 pounds over the top of this gate, and I have no confidence that the 3 people on the other side will catch me when I come. So I backed down. Now, the other boys went on the other side except Luke, steadfast, trustworthy Luke, my nephew, right there by my side. And Luke said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, maybe I can scooch under that gate like Kayla did. He looked like he was not sure. But I got down on my back, and I scooched and I scooched and I scooched. My legs went right through, no problem. But then I got to my belly and my rib cage, and I got stuck. About that time, a woman drove up in an SUV, a black SUV. Her window went down. She said, do you need help? Do I need to call 911? And I was just ready to say, absolutely. Call in the military, the cavalry, anybody. Get me out of here. But my beloved friends and family said, no, he's fine. There I am, under there, trying to scooch around, stuck under the gate. And then one of my loved ones thought it was funny. Thought I looked like somebody trying to stuff a bagel down into a toaster as I was trying to get through under that gate. And they said, this is too good to be true. And they took a picture of me and posted it on social media. for 2 weeks after this, I heard from family, friends, and acquaintances, people I didn't even know, saying, "What we don't understand, were you trying to sneak into the graveyard or sneak out of the graveyard? What were you doing?" I finally extricated myself, and I stood up, and Luke, old trustworthy, faithful Luke, he says, "Uncle John, I'll walk with you back to the front of this graveyard, and somebody can bring that car around and pick us up and get us to that coffee and food to eat." And that's what we did. And I'll tell you what, I agree with whoever, I don't even know who said it, I'll agree with the family member who said this is too good to be true. Because I had 8 family members and 2 strangers stop what they were doing and do whatever they could to get me out of my jam. That's a good story. That's a miracle story. That's a story of love. That's a story that has parts of it that seem almost too good to be true, far better than we would have ever expected. I believe Luke tells the truth. Luke writes in the first words of his gospel, "I did the research. I talked to everybody. I compiled a faithful and clear version of what I heard." And I don't see any reason to disbelieve what Luke did. I think he talked to Mary. Somebody had to. She was the only one that knew this part of the story. I think he interviewed her. I can't think of a single reason Mary would have lied. Can you? I think they told the truth. I think Luke put it all down for us. I think we read it today and it still touches our hearts. Now you may say, this story's too good to be true. But I'm going to say back to you, I'm convinced this is a story whose truth is better than we could have ever expected. It's a miracle story, a story of love, a story of God. God bless this story. Merry Christmas to you all. Take that story home with you and keep telling it, especially that part that seems almost too good